In this lecture, we are going to examine the project.json file, the global.json, and the appsettings.json. The project.json file is new in ASP.NET Core. It is used to define the project's server-side dependencies, as well as other project-specific information. The top-level default sections include the project.json associated in our application. So we can see at the top of the project.json file, we have the version of the application. We have the compilation options, which we examined earlier, which is emit entry point to true, which states that we want this file structure entry point to be associated with the project.json. The project.json defines all the assembly dependencies on the server side associated with our application. If we go to the References tab over here, click it, you'll see two references associated here. You have the DNX 4.51, which is the full .framework DNX, and you have DNX core, which is associated with the server-side dependencies of the core CLR. Here are the assembly references associated with the two DNX runtimes. So right here I can see 4.51, all of the server-side dependencies, and over here I can see DNX core 5.0. So what happens if I want to remove one of these dependencies? So what happens is an automatic compilation, as we discussed before. So let's go ahead and take out Application Insights, and let's remove it and see what happens. Once I save it, it restores the packages. As you've noticed, this got rid of the Microsoft.ASP.NET Application Insights in the DNX 4.51 and also in the DNX core. Now watch me add it back, save it. You see as it's restoring all of the packages associated with that server-side dependency. So everything in the Microsoft Application Insights.ASP.NET and that NuGet packages and all of its assembly references are associated. Just by removing it and adding it, you add that dependency to your application. It makes it easier for server-side compilation. This is the point of the project.json. It is the substitute for the web.config. Now, instead of the web.config by default, you have a project.json file. So all of your server-side dependencies you can see right here with diagnostics, ASP.NET MVC, MVC tag helpers. You can even come in here and change what version you want to emit in your project. So right here, I can type that, and then you can automatically search which version you want. So if you want to put that, typically it will come up with IntelliSense. The only ones that I have installed on here is RC1. So I'm going to leave that right there and put that back, save it. And these are all of my server-side dependencies. As you can see here, as we go down further, we have the commands. This is associated with the execution on the server side. So these commands we will run via the DNX runtime. It will look for command web. Once we do the DNU restore, it will spin off our ASP.NET server, which is a Kestrel web server on localhost 5000. We can also, in a subsequent lecture, associate our entity framework command, which we will generate our code first entity framework context. So this is where the commands are associated in the project.json. Next, we have the different frameworks associated in our application. So I have DNX 4.51, which is the .NET 4.51, and I have the DNX core. Watch on the right side what happens when I remove one of these framework dependencies. Save it, and you'll see in the references, it's going to remove that framework version. So you can just target the DNX core if you want to. You don't need the full .NET framework associated with the DNX runtime. A lot of cases, you'll develop an application that runs with the full DNX and the DNX core, and then you can target in your application, if you're on such and such framework, then implement such and such code. As you go down, you have the exclude, which associates excluding the www root and the node.modules in our application. We have the publish exclude, and then we have the scripts to pre-publish, which is our npm install, bower install, gulp, and gulp minified, which associates our client-side dependencies. As you can see, I have bower and npm associated with node.js to install my client-side libraries associated with Gulp and associated with jQuery and Bootstrap for my Bower extensions. So this is the project.json. Everything that runs through the application runs through the project.json. Remember, it is the main manager of all your server-side dependencies. You're not implementing this in a web.config anymore. As we go further in the application, we also have an appsettings.json. Typically in an appsettings.json, you will put the information that you would put in a web.config, and that is your secret information as far as your app settings. If you have a specific connection string or any type of value you want to keep secure in your app, you can put it in your appsettings.json. Or if you go to your application here, you right-click and put Manage User Secrets. This is another place you can put connection strings and information that you want to associate in your application and pull from the secrets.json. We will discuss this later when we start our implementations in any framework and managing data that we want to keep secure. The secrets.json is useful for that, but also your appsettings.json, you can use any connection strings typically that you'll put for your SQL Server database or any database that you want to connect to beyond SQL Server, whether it's an Oracle database or MySQL. Typically in your appsettings.json, you will put that information there. And finally, your global.json is used to configure the solution as a whole. It has two sections, the projects and the SDK. The projects property designates which folders contain source code for the solution. By default, the project structure places source codes in the SRC folder, allowing build artifacts to be placed in the sibling folder, making it easier to exclude such things from source control. The SDK property specifies the version of the DNX that Visual Studio will use when opening the solution. It is set here rather than in the project.json to avoid scenarios where different projects within a solution targeting different versions of the SDK. These are the three primary JSON files that are used for configuration in your application. You can see right here by default in a scaffolded website, you have your appsettings.json, your project.json, and also your global.json. So these are your different JSON files. In the next lecture, we will tackle our startup.cs file and see how we configure those dependencies and those different items in our startup.cs. I want to thank you for joining me in this lecture. Have a nice day.